One of the most disturbing aspects of slavery is the sexual exploitation of black men by white women. These encounters were not consensual. They were rooted in power imbalances that left enslaved men vulnerable to abuse. In the 1800s, the world was a vastly different place. It was a time when humanity's darkest impulses were allowed to flourish under the institution of slavery. Amid this grim period, the exploitation of enslaved people by their oppressors extended to unimaginable acts of cruelty, particularly by white women toward black male slaves. These stories, though harrowing, are an essential part of our history and deserve to be told in full. Slavery was a system rooted in the dehumanization of individuals, reducing them to property. Both men and women were enslaved, but the experiences they endured often varied. Some enslaved individuals had lighter skin tones due to the systemic sexual exploitation that had already occurred across generations. These individuals often faced unique dangers, as their appearance could sometimes blur racial boundaries in the eyes of white society, provoking both fascination and resentment from their oppressors. A significant number of white enslavers operated under the racist ideology that their race was inherently superior. This toxic belief system justified their exploitation and cruelty, granting them unchecked authority over the lives of those they enslaved. In this context, enslaved individuals with lighter skin often found themselves in particularly precarious positions, as their proximity to whiteness made them objects of both fetishization and contempt. Contrary to the often romanticized portrayals of white women as passive bystanders or benevolent figures in the system of slavery, historical evidence shows they were active participants. Many white women who were married to slaveholders held significant power within their households and used this authority in exploitative ways. They exercised control over enslaved men and women, often wielding their positions to assert dominance and satisfy their desires. White women were not just victims of patriarchal systems. They were often complicit in upholding and perpetuating the institution of slavery. Historian Stephanie E. Jones-Rogers has uncovered compelling evidence that white women were deeply involved in the economic and social mechanisms of slavery. From inheriting enslaved people as property to actively managing their labor, white women's participation in slavery was neither incidental nor passive. It was deliberate and strategic. One of the most disturbing aspects of this history is the sexual exploitation of black men by white women. These encounters were not consensual. They were rooted in power imbalances that left enslaved men vulnerable to abuse. White women exploited their positions to force enslaved men into sexual relationships, often using coercion, threats, and manipulation. In some cases, these relationships were framed as romantic, but they were anything but. The power dynamics inherent in slavery made genuine consent impossible. Enslaved men were dehumanized and stripped of their autonomy, leaving them with no recourse to resist. Even in situations where emotional bonds may have formed, the underlying structure of oppression cast a long shadow over any interaction. The concept of seduction was also weaponized. Some white women used their allure to manipulate enslaved men into relationships, blurring the lines between coercion and consent in deeply troubling ways. These dynamics reveal a dark and often overlooked aspect of slavery: the abuse of power by those society considered the moral guardians of the home. The consequences of these exploitative relationships extended far beyond the individuals involved. Society at the time had rigid racial and moral codes, and any violation of these norms, especially by white women, was met with scandal and outrage. Relationships between white women and black men, even those marked by coercion, were viewed as a grave transgression of societal boundaries. Rumors of such liaisons spread quickly, leading to public shame, ostracism, and sometimes violent repercussions. White men, feeling their dominance threatened, often responded with anger and retaliation, directing their fury at the enslaved men rather than their wives. The fallout from these relationships could be catastrophic, resulting in physical violence, social exclusion, or even death for the enslaved men involved. The sexual abuse of enslaved black men by white women remains a largely untold story, overshadowed by the broader narrative of slavery. Yet historical records, including testimonies from the American Freedmen's Inquiry Commission, reveal the horrifying extent of this abuse. Enslaved men recounted experiences of sexual exploitation, forced procreation, and physical assault at the hands of white women who used their power to dominate and degrade them. This abuse was not confined to isolated incidents. It was part of a systemic pattern that underscores the pervasive cruelty of slavery. White women, often seen as symbols of virtue and innocence, were in many cases the perpetrators of profound suffering. Beyond sexual exploitation, white women also played a significant role in the economic aspects of slavery. Many white women were trained from a young age to view enslaved people as assets and were deeply involved in the financial benefits of slaveholding. They inherited enslaved people from their families, managed their labor, and sometimes even bought and sold enslaved individuals for profit. In some cases, enslaved black women were forced into roles as wet nurses, breastfeeding the children of their white enslavers while often being separated from their own babies. This practice highlights the cruel ironies of slavery. White women outsourced the nurturing of their children to the very people they oppressed, perpetuating a cycle of exploitation that infiltrated even the most intimate aspects of family life. By the late 1800s, slavery had been legally abolished, but its legacy of trauma persisted. The stories of black men who endured sexual abuse at the hands of white women were largely silenced, their voices drowned out by societal shame and denial. Figures like Harriet Jacobs courageously brought these truths to light, but many accounts remain buried in the shadows of history. The wounds of slavery continue to affect society today. The systemic racism and power dynamics that defined that era have left a lasting impact, reminding us of the importance of confronting and acknowledging these dark chapters of our past. Understanding the full scope of slavery, including the role of white women as active participants and perpetrators of abuse, is not just about studying history, it is about facing the truths that have shaped our present. These hidden stories, long buried under layers of denial and selective memory, reveal the depth of humanity's capacity for cruelty. But they also illuminate the resilience and strength of those who endured unimaginable pain. To confront this history is to honor those who survived, those whose voices were silenced, and those who fought back against systems of oppression. Their stories are not just echoes of the past, they are warnings for the future. Slavery is often framed as a historical institution that ended with emancipation, but its legacies live on. The power dynamics, systemic racism, and deep inequalities that slavery created remain woven into the fabric of modern society. The dehumanization that justified slavery did not disappear. It morphed into new forms: segregation, mass incarceration, discriminatory policies, and pervasive stereotypes that devalue black lives. To understand slavery's full scope is to better understand the structures that perpetuate inequality today. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths about privilege, power, and the enduring impact of systemic racism. For generations, these stories of abuse, exploitation, and survival have been silenced. The narratives that make white women passive victims of a patriarchal system have overshadowed their active roles in perpetuating slavery and its cruelties. This selective retelling of history has served to protect privilege and deny accountability. But silence is complicity, and failing to tell the full story allows those injustices to fester in the shadows, influencing our present in ways we may not even recognize. Today, as we grapple with systemic racism, it is impossible to ignore the parallels between past and present. The same power dynamics that allowed white women to exploit enslaved men are reflected in modern injustices. The racial profiling that reduces black men to dangerous stereotypes, the disproportionate rates of incarceration, the constant demand for black individuals to prove their worth and humanity in systems designed to devalue them. These are the echoes of slavery, reverberating through time. To reflect on these stories is to feel the weight of history pressing on our present. It is to mourn the lives shattered by slavery's brutalities and to feel anger at the systems that allowed such horrors to persist. It is to experience sorrow for the silence that followed, the erasure of voices that could have spoken truth to power. But it is also a call to action, a reminder that reckoning with the past is not optional if we want to build a more just future. When we uncover these hidden truths, we recognize the humanity of those who lived through slavery's atrocities. We honor their strength, their dignity, and their resilience in the face of unimaginable cruelty. In doing so, we also recognize the humanity in ourselves and the shared responsibility we bear to ensure such injustices never happen again. History is not just a record of what has happened, it is a mirror that reflects who we are. The injustices of the past continue to shape the realities of the present. The same systems of power and privilege that upheld slavery are visible today in the racial wealth gap, disparities in healthcare, education, and employment, and the over-policing of black and brown communities. These injustices are not coincidences. They are the direct results of a history we have yet to fully confront. To reflect on slavery's full scope is to ask difficult questions. How do we address the privileges built on a foundation of exploitation? How do we dismantle the systems that continue to perpetuate inequality? How do we ensure that the voices of those who have been silenced are finally heard? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones. The journey toward justice and equality begins with honesty and empathy. We must be honest about the parts of history we find most uncomfortable, the stories that challenge our assumptions and force us to reevaluate our understanding of the past. And we must approach these stories with empathy, recognizing that they are not just abstract accounts of suffering but deeply human experiences. Empathy allows us to connect the past with the present. It helps us see the through line from slavery to segregation, from segregation to systemic racism, and from systemic racism to the struggles for justice and equality we face today. Empathy helps us understand that these are not isolated events but part of a larger continuum that demands our attention and action. By uncovering these hidden histories, we honor not only the pain but also the strength of those who endured. Their resilience in the face of oppression is a testament to the human spirit's capacity to persevere. It is their legacy that calls us to action, to challenge injustice, to confront racism, and to build a society where such atrocities can never be repeated. This reflection is not an endpoint but a beginning. It is an invitation to learn, to listen, and to act. It is a reminder that history's purpose is not to make us comfortable but to make us better. Let us move forward with a commitment to truth, justice, and the recognition that our shared humanity demands nothing less. If you found this video insightful, subscribe to the channel for more stories that challenge us to think, feel, and grow. Share your thoughts in the comments, and like this video by tapping on the thumbs up. Together, we can uncover the stories that shape our world and take steps toward a more inclusive and equitable future. Thank you for watching. I'm David. See you in the next one.